Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Mary Boleyn. Usually it's just me, but today I have my friend Lynn with me. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
I'm happy to have you here to talk about
I'm
Mary
excited
Boleyn.
too.
So Mary Boleyn was born probably in 1499. We don't know for sure. Female problems, no birth date. She was also probably the oldest, but again, we don't know. And we don't know for sure, but she does seem to have been treated as if she were the oldest. Her sister Anne was likely born 2 years later, probably, again, because she's a girl, so it didn't necessarily write that down or keep track of it after the fact.
That's crazy. They didn't record women's births, but they
Yeah, I
did
mean,
the
sometimes
men.
they recorded it and then they were just like, oh, we don't need to keep track of this. Or, I mean, a lot of stuff goes down with her family, so it's possible the records were just missing.
Ah,
Anne was followed 3 years later by a little boy named George. George was born in 1504, and that we do know. Those are records they did save. So George was born in 1504. He was probably the youngest.
he got away with everything then.
He did. He did. He was the only boy. He was the youngest. He was kind of a big deal.
Yep.
Mary's father was from a respected gentry family, so not noble, but they had money. They were upper middle class, or kind of think like Kate Middleton's family. And gentry's not really a thing, I don't think, anymore. It's not a modern concept, but not noble. But they would, know the nobles. They would go to the parties and the jousts and everything. So they
Fun
were trying
stuff.
to work their way up in the world. Her mother was a Howard, which was an old noble family. Her father was the Duke of Norfolk, but the Howard family had some setbacks, and socially they had fallen a bit. They were not doing great socially. There'd been some scandals, and they were like, oh, those guys. Mary's childhood would have been comfortable. She had an education, the best one she could have expected as a young English girl. It was the Renaissance in England now, so girls were starting to get an education.
Fun. I love the Renaissance ages.
Yeah. During their childhood, Anne and George were always very close. Mary got along with her siblings, but she wasn't as close. Like, the two of them were kind of BFF, and Mary was kind of off on her own. When Mary was about 15 years old, she was sent abroad to further her education. This was common for the time. She was sent to a grander household than her own, to be a lady for someone else. This is where she would have been expected not only to serve the lady of the house, but also learn how to be a lady of a grand household. Like, there's a lot. It's not just keeping track of the staff. Like, if your husband is away at war, sometimes you're in charge of mustering the troops for reinforcements or getting the supplies to them, or so it was a job.
A lot to it. Yep.
And this education would either prepare her for running her own grand household in the event of an advantageous marriage, or to learn the skills she would need to serve any number of great ladies. So it would either get her a better job or get her a marriage that would then make her the boss. Good jobs lead to good husbands. That was the vibe of the time.
Hmm. I don't think that's so the case anymore.
No, no.
I think knowing how to cook and please them and make them happy. That's the way, right? Don't they say the way to the man's heart is to his stomach
That's what
now?
they say. At 15, she had a job and further education secured for her. She was made lady in waiting to King Henry VIII's sister, Princess Mary, who was 18, so just a few years older than her. Princess Mary was being sent to France to marry the 52-year-old King Louis XII.
Ugh,
Yeah,
old.
she didn't have a
Can you
say. Her
imagine
brother
being
was the
married to
King
an
of
animal?
England, and
Oh
he was
yeah.
like, you're going. You're going to France, you're going to be their new queen. She didn't have a say. So our Mary was going to be learning how to run a royal household, a pretty sweet gig, like she was going with who was going to be the Queen of France.
That'd be fun.
The 52-year-old king had no surviving sons, despite his previous marriages.
Um,
So
not bad.
he needed a young wife to help him remedy that problem. In France, only boys could get the throne, so he needed a boy.
Ah, that's where she comes in.
Yes, Princess Mary married Louis XII of France in October of 1514, but then King Louis died less than 3 months later.
Oh,
Word on the street was that he wore himself out trying to make an heir with his teenage wife. But likely it was just from being in his 50s in the early 16th century, like he was going to die soon.
yep.
Mary's sister Anne, who also had come to France to serve Queen Mary, decided not to return to England. She got a new job. Well, it was the same job, but new queen, because when the king dies, the queen is no longer the queen. So her stepdaughter was the new queen, married to the new king. And Mary also decided to stay in France. She wasn't going to work for the new queen, but she was going to serve in the court of the new king, King Francois I. And that would be different than serving the queen. Serving the queen was what she had been doing, and that would be part of her education. Serving King Francis, because she's a female, would be different. She would be, the men
Like
who
a big
served him
kid.
were his friends. So she was the female in the friend group, a female in the friend group. It was different than serving the queen. She wasn't really learning much except how to flirt.
Okay. I was gonna say, don't you just wouldn't you be there to serve the king in bed?
Yeah, yeah. You, instead of helping the queen get dressed in the morning,
Yeah,
you were keeping the king company in the evenings, probably.
that would be interesting.
During her time in France, Mary did reportedly learn a lot, but French court at the time was very sexually open. In France, syphilis was known as the Italian disease, and it was going around.
Ooh,
But I feel the need to mention that it was also going around in Italy, but there it was known as the French disease. So no one could really decide who was to blame for syphilis, but the Italians and the French blamed each other.
oh, that makes sense.
Word on the street was that this suited the teenage Mary. She thrived on courtly love and the court flirting game. It was all her vibes. She was like, this is kind of fun. Reportedly, she was quite promiscuous, making her way up to the mistress of the new French king, Francois I, the husband of the queen that her sister was serving. She was known as a great and infamous whore, and at times as the king's English mare because he rode her so well. So rude.
Yeah.
And her reputation made her way back to England, and her father decided that she was 20, she needed to come home and settle down, like party days were over.
Oh, boy.
These were like her college years, right? She spent 5 years in France doing her own thing. Now she had to come home and get married.
Isn't 20 a little old to be married back then?
A little, yeah. Yeah, I mean, legally you could be married at 12 then if you were a girl. So,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
yeah. Back in England, her father had gotten her another job. This was as lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, the Queen of England. So she was coming home to serve the English queen. She would have been seen as fit to serve the Queen of England. She had just spent the last 5 years at French court learning how to do it, so now she can come back and she has experience.
Mm. But it
But
sounds like she had more experience servicing the king.
yeah, well, she definitely got that too. I mean, she was both because she was with Queen Mary for a little bit.
Yeah.
And this would have been a massive culture shock. The French court had been free and loose, flirting was expected, and love affairs were just out in the open. In England, and especially the English queen,
They're probably frowned upon.
they were more repressed. At English court, you were expected to act like a lady, very demure, very mindful. You couldn't wear those sexy French hats that showed some of your hairline. Visible hair is a pathway to sexual immorality, so cover that shit up.
Oh,
And no flirting. Don't even really talk to men unless it's chaperoned and very proper. Like, you can't just, like, stop in the hallway and talk to a man.
Beck, could you imagine if that was still today? Oh,
Right?
no thanks.
Well, and to go from French court to English court, where at French court, it was weird if you didn't stop in the hallway and flirt with a man.
Yeah. And now you
Go
have
to England and you're not
oh.
even supposed to lower your eyes when you pass them in the hallway because they're proper over here.
That would be so awkward.
Yeah. Now, the king was less proper in private, the King of England. He flirted and had mistresses on the down low. And his favorite hunting grounds were the ladies of his wife.
Ah, that makes sense.
They worked for her, they worked for him, and they were loyal to the royal family. So they were seen as, like, good opportunities for the king's dating life in secret.
Mm-hmm.
In public, he was loyal to his wife and a God-fearing man. So this was not common knowledge. People knew about it because he had an illegitimate son already with one of his mistresses, so people knew, but you didn't talk about it.
Oh, okay.
After a year back at English court, Mary was going to go back to France for a visit. The King of France, her former boyfriend, was meeting the King of England in Calais. And I haven't talked about Calais for a while. Since like season 1, we talked about it a lot, but I haven't been back there for a while. During the 100 Years' War, all that England gained was a small piece of French land named Calais. So it was over by France because it had been part of France. The 100 Years' War happened. It was 114 years long, and all they got was this little area called Calais. And so that became kind of the meeting spot for the English and the French, because the English would have to travel to it. The French wouldn't have to go as far, but it was technically English land over by France. So that's where they like to meet up.
That makes sense.
And Mary was accompanying the Queen of England, Queen Catherine, to this meeting because it was both royal couples, the French royal couple and the English royal couple.
Oh, boy.
And this would have been exciting. She was going back to France, and she was going to see her sister again because Anne was still serving Queen Claude, and she was going to be there too. And this meeting is mad famous. It's known as the Field of Cloth of Gold. And I've talked about it tons of times before. It was all these gold fabric tents set up that looked like buildings and fountains with wine coming out of them. And it was a party.
Oh, we need those.
Right?
We definitely need the fountains with wine coming out.
Right? Although they didn't look overly sanitary. Just have a wine fountain.
Oh, yeah, but
Just any old person using it. But yes, I'm not opposed to
take
wine.
your house and have one.
Yes,
Come on now.
absolutely.
And alcohol kills germs. Come on
Keep
now.
all the drunk nobles away and just have a
There
party.
you go. Yes.
I mentioned the Field of Cloth of Gold in Madeleine of Valois' episode because her mother, Queen Claude, was in attendance and pregnant at the time with Madeleine of Valois, future Summer Queen of Scots. So she has her own episode, and her mom was pregnant with her. This is right at the start of her episode. At this summit, the King of France and the King of England bonded in a sort of toxic, competitive way. They were like frat bros who got put in charge of countries.
Oh, boy.
They had like wrestling challenges, and it was a whole rip your shirt off and wrestle me kind of situation.
That might be an interesting watch, though.
Yeah, I mean, they were both reportedly...
Who would you root for?
They were both reportedly young and attractive and charming, so it was a party. And you just root for whoever's country you lived in, probably.
Yeah.
If you're English, you're rooting for King Henry. If you're French, you're rooting for King Francois. And it may have been during this time that Henry found out about the King of France and Mary Boleyn's relationship history. This maybe would have been when it came up. And he likely left Calais with the knowledge that Mary Boleyn could party. He that hasn't been how she's been acting at English court, but there would have been lots of rumors, and they would have been like, oh, she used to live here.
Yeah.
But Mary Boleyn was getting married. Her father's connections, along with her prominence at English court, had gotten her a match with King Henry's friend William Carey. And when they returned to England, after the Field of Cloth of Gold, 21-year-old Mary Boleyn married 25-year-old William Carey. So, respectable ages. Like, nobody's 12.
Mm-hmm.
They're only 4 years apart. 21 and 25. I can deal with that.
Well, yeah. Weren't you married at that age?
I was a mother at that
20.
age.
Yeah.
I got married at 19.
Hold on now. Yeah.
But my husband at the time was only 21, so we were close in age. We were just very young.
Yeah.
Armed with his newfound knowledge about Mary Boleyn and cloaked in the safety of Mary now being married to his friend and third cousin Will, King Henry started an affair with Mary. Because now she's married. If she gets pregnant, no big deal. It's probably her husband's, right?
Yep.
So King Henry VIII thought married ladies were definitely the best kind of mistresses.
Well, yeah.
We don't know for sure how Mary felt about this relationship. She went along with it, but she wouldn't have had much choice. You don't just turn down the 30-year-old charming King Henry VIII. He is not the guy from the portrait yet. He's not the big guy with the turkey leg and the drunk and with all the late. I mean, he's a young 30-year-old handsome fit man.
Yeah.
And reportedly extremely charming from the time of his childhood. So he was a fun guy to hang out with. And Mary may have also experienced pressure from her family or even her husband because all of those people benefited from this affair. King Henry lavished gifts onto Mary's family, including her husband.
Nice. Boy, it would be nice to have something like that. Somebody lavish gifts on you just to sleep with them.
Right? It's like, pay. I mean, it's a little awkward though. She's a newlywed and the king's just paying
Oh
off her
yeah.
husband. Despite having a husband and a boyfriend, Mary didn't get pregnant her first year of marriage or her second year of marriage. It's possible that her marriage was struggling. Her husband likely at least suspected his wife's relationship with the king because that would be the only thing that explained all these gifts.
Hmm.
And the king was probably utilizing pull out and pray birth control methods because, well, it wouldn't be
Yep.
the end of the world if she got pregnant. It wasn't really the goal to just have bastard kids all over the place.
No, that's kind of frowned upon still today
Yeah.
when you're in power.
Yeah, especially if you're married to someone else. In 1522, Mary's sister Anne was also called back home to settle down, and like her sister, she got a job as lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, so they were co-workers again.
Oh,
And this would have been a culture shock for Anne, too, just like it had been for Mary. She came from French court, and now
mm-hmm.
she's in English court, and everyone's very proper, very ladylike.
No, no flirting.
No, not publicly. Like, flirting is like looking at someone in the eye for just a second too long.
Oh my goodness.
Anne started a flirtationship with Henry Percy, coincidentally, cousin of Mary's husband, Will. So if everything went to plan, Anne's sister would be her cousin-in-law. They would be married to cousins. That was the plan. Anne really liked this guy. But it wasn't meant to be. Everyone around agreed that Anne was far too lowborn to be married to Percy. Love schmove. Percy needed a better marriage than that, and Anne was not the move.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, and they were reportedly both in love with each other, but Percy had been betrothed to someone else by his parents when he was just a child, and they were like, no, that's definitely going to happen. You can't blow up this engagement.
Oh man. Ugh.
So Anne was taken from court and put in kind of a timeout. She was brought back to her family's castle of Hever Castle, and like, you can't be at court because you're not behaving yourself. Meanwhile, Mary was still mistress of the king. She was not on timeout because her behavior was benefiting the family and Anne's behavior was embarrassing the family. So they were like, oh no, Mary's fine. Mary can sleep with the king because that's helping all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But Anne can't just blow up this engagement of these important people. Like, no. So that kind of created, I feel like, an awkward dynamic between the sisters. Anne was grounded she was in her 20s and grounded. Mm-hmm. And her sister was sleeping with the king and being rewarded for it.
Yep.
In 1524, it was Mary's brother George's turn to get married. He was 20, and that's when the Boleyns like to start looking for spouses for their kids. And he was known as a witty, charming womanizer. Word on the street was he'd sleep with any female that he could get a hold of.
Oh, wow.
His bride was supposed to be 19-year-old Jane Parker, and Jane was a friend and co-worker of George's sisters Mary and Anne. She also worked for the Queen.
Okay.
They had all served as ladies to Queen Catherine of Aragon at the same time. So they're all young, younger than the Queen, and just kind of, co-workers in your early 20s. And Jane Parker was the daughter of a baron, so she came from nobility, but it was lower nobility. Barons are just above gentry.
Yep.
So he was marrying up, socially at least, because his father was gentry, his mother was noble, his bride was going to be noble. So he was entering into this whole noble realm.
That sounds fun.
And we don't know if their marriage was happy. They never had children. They would be married 12 years and never once have children, but that could be for any number of reasons. They didn't have effective fertility treatments back then.
Yeah.
But it is suspected that maybe they weren't happily married because a lot of times when people just hated being around each other, they just wouldn't have kids because they couldn't stand it.
You gotta sleep and you gotta have fun to have.
Yeah, things have to happen, and those things might not have been happening because 12 years, no kids. The same year that George married Jane, Mary was finally pregnant for the first time since her marriage to Will. She's on her fourth year of marriage, and she's pregnant for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And there is some question about whether the baby was William Carey's or the King's.
Yep.
Because she was reportedly, at the time, sleeping with both of them, so it could be either. But her husband, William Carey, recognized this baby as his. He was like, oh, definitely mine. But that's kind of probably the deal he had with his cousin, the King. if your
Yep.
wife gets pregnant, it's yours. And he's like, okay, deal.
Hmm.
And he needed heirs, so it works.
Back then, they didn't know until you had the baby if it was a boy or girl, right?
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't. I mean, you could be pregnant with twins, you wouldn't know because
Yeah.
there's no way to check that necessarily. And you could suspect from context clues, but possibly in part, he recognized this baby, possibly in part because of more gifts from the king. The king was like, oh, your wife's pregnant. Here's a bunch of, for lack of a better word, child support for your
Yeah.
baby. And everyone just agreed that this was the legitimate baby of William Carey and Mary Boleyn. So it was going to be their child, inherit their stuff, and it might have been. There's just no way to know.
No.
And this baby was a little girl named Catherine Carey, likely named after the Queen, Mary's boss, and the wife of her boyfriend. So
Hmm.
kind of awkward, but lots of babies were
Yeah.
named after the Queen. So it was not
Oh,
unusual.
Catherine's a pretty name.
Yes. And I mean, the Queen Catherine was beloved. So, and Mary worked for her. So it would be totally, most of her ladies probably had a baby named Catherine. That's where we get
Yeah.
Catherine Parr from. I mean, there's a lot of Catherines who have episodes who are named after this one woman.
Wow.
Various books and movies and TV shows suggest that Anne was pushed toward the king to keep him occupied while Mary was pregnant. Because while she was pregnant, it wouldn't be seen as proper for her to still be sleeping with the king, especially once she got very big. And the
Oh, yeah.
Boleyns, the theory is that the Boleyns were like, Anne, go keep him busy because Mary's trying to have this baby here. This is important, but we can't lose the king's favor. And so it was around
Oh,
this time that
boy.
Mary's sister Anne
I think I'd
may,
hate my sister.
right? She may have started the relationship with the king during this time when her sister was pregnant.
Ah.
That is, I mean, any show or movie or book, like historical fiction book or whatever that covers this time has
Hmm.
pretty much Mary feeling like, you bitch, like I'm pregnant, possibly with the king's child, and you just swoop in and now
Hmm.
you're his new mistress, like my younger sister. Rude.
Yeah.
But they
Yep.
also all say like, well, yeah, because the family was like, we're getting all these benefits, and if he was going to find a new mistress while Mary was pregnant anyway, they wanted it
Hmm.
to be a Boleyn. But that had to make their dynamic so awkward.
Yep.
And Anne and George had always been much closer than Mary had been, so she's pregnant. She's probably feeling pretty isolated at this point. But also, maybe it
I
was a
don't.
relief. I mean, her family was pushing her on the king. Maybe she didn't want that. Maybe she was like, oh, someone else can tag in. So we don't really know. But people like to lean into the drama of Mary was like, what are you doing, stealing my boyfriend?
Makes it life a little more interesting that way.
Yeah, it makes the story more fun. Henry was now sleeping with both Boleyn sisters, so awkward.
Yes.
And this pregnancy seemed to trigger King Henry into preferring Anne to Mary. This seemed to be the point at which Anne was more his main mistress and Mary was less so.
Oh boy.
And Anne had a lot of making up to do to her family after that embarrassing Henry Percy situation. She was finally back at court. And they were like, okay,
Oh
here's what you
wow.
have to do if you want to be back at court. We need you to stop embarrassing the family and be more like Mary. So that was the deal. If she wanted to be back at court, she had to play along. 2 years after having little Lady Catherine, Mary was pregnant again. And again, we don't know for sure who the father was because Mary was at the end of her relationship with the king, but still occasionally visiting him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more likely that Catherine is King Henry's daughter than this second baby, but it's possible that they both are. But again, her husband acknowledged this baby as his, same deal as the first time. And they named this baby Henry Carey. Legally, the legitimate child of William and Mary Carey, named after King Henry VIII, his possible biological father. But like the Queen, a lot of babies were named after the king. A lot
Yep.
of people had baby Catherines and baby Henrys because that was the name of the king and the queen, and that's historically who people were named after often.
Yeah.
Especially if they were in the royal circle, you wanted to be able to be like, "Look, I named my baby after you, boss," and then maybe you get a raise or a
That would be
promotion.
nice. Glad we don't do that these days. Can you
Yeah,
imagine all the names?
right? Right? It's just repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. It's so
Yep.
repetitive. And after the birth of little Henry, things changed. The king was in love with Mary's sister Anne, for sure, for sure. And Mary was living with her husband and her two young children. She had settled down into her life, and she was not the king's mistress anymore. Her sister was definitely full in that job. In 1528, when Mary was about 29, her husband was about 33, and William came down with the sweating sickness. So the sweating sickness was a fast illness. You could be seemingly healthy when you woke up in the morning and dead before bedtime. It took a day.
Okay.
And it usually started with an overwhelming sense of dread or anxiety. That was usually the first symptom, which is super strange. But I'm thinking maybe it had something to do with heart rate. Like if your heart was speeding up, maybe you'd feel
Mm-hmm.
anxious, like you were having a panic
That makes
attack or
sense. Yeah.
something. So I'm thinking maybe it had something to do with heart rate, but we really don't know that much about the sweating. Like we have stories, but nobody really knows what it was.
Hmm.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.